Doomsday deck correctly in Commander, and what kind of cards I consider to be core to the list, what kind of different things you can do to fill out the list, and the kinds of cards you just want to be running in general. I've grabbed a couple here already, but we're going to be grabbing more as time goes on. And the first thing I'm going to talk about here is cantrips. In Doomsday, you need a large number of cantrips in your deck so that proportionately you're always seeing cantrips. Not only do we want to use these cantrips to craft a hand that wins us the game, being a combo deck, we also need these cantrips to open our Doomsday pile so that we can win the turn we cast it. So it's incredibly important we have a high density of cantrips. Now, some cantrips, like Ideas Unbound, are going to be specific to Doomsday in that you're going to be placing them in the pile and using them because they're very strong, and they're very good to open Doomsday piles with, because typically when you open a Doomsday pile with a Doomsday cantrip, you don't need any additional mana to win the game. The strength of playing Doomsday in Commander is that the mana barrier to win in this deck is typically 5 to 6, and as that mana cost goes up, you get to add layers of protection to your combo. So you're going to need a high density of tutors to A, find Doomsday, but you also need a high density of cantrips to find those tutors, to find the mana to go off, to make sure you make your land drops, etc. So a card like Ponder is actually more important to your build as a combo player than a card like Ideas Unbound is, because Ponder is good in any phase of the game. Not to mention the fact that when we're done building an efficient Doomsday deck, even any card that says blue draw a card has the potential to win for 5 mana via Lion's Eye Diamond, though it leaves you a little bit more open to hate. And other than that, the card is just probably the strongest combo cantrip that's been printed ever. There's a reason this card is restricted in Vintage. You're not going to be playing with super high fetch land count like you would in a 60 card deck, though you do want to play as many as possible. So in general, this card will be better than a Brainstorm. You can build Doomsday a little more control-y, and in that case, maybe this card wouldn't be better than Brainstorm, but no matter what, you're always going to be using Ponder. The number of decks I've seen recently that try to run Doomsday without cards like this just absolutely baffles me. One thing you could do if you're thinking about playing this is go read up on Legacy Doomsday decks. Not just Legacy Doomsday Labman, but Doomsday Tendrils as well. You'll notice that all of them play the max number of Dark Rituals. In fact, if you go back and look at ritual-based combo in Vintage, etc., despite being able to play things like Black Lotus and Power and every card ever printed in the game, these decks will all be running 4 copies of Dark Ritual. Why? Quite simply, you cast Dark Ritual for 1 black, and now you can cast your Doomsday. This essentially means 1 land you can tap to cast your Doomsday. This is incredibly important, as your cantrips are going to be mostly blue. So, unless we're getting all dual lands into play, which is optimal and what we'd like to see, it's not always going to happen in Commander, and we love to have a card like this that allows us to cast this easily. Not to mention the fact that when we draw a card like Doomsday hard in our deck, which is incredibly good, now when we still get that tutor that would normally go find Doomsday, now we can choose to find something that accelerates our win condition by a couple turns. This is very, very good. Lion's Eye Diamond is incredibly similar, except it opens you to getting owned by counterspells. So quite simply put, even though Lion's Eye Diamond can in fact be dead at certain tables or in certain situations where you're seeing a bunch of blue mana untapped and passing, you can't pass up on running the card, because when people tap out, Lion's Eye Diamond is the card that lets you win in the first couple turns of the game. So it pretty much says, hey, you have to hold your counterspells up in the first couple turns, and you can't develop your board fast, because I play Lion's Eye Diamond, and if I draw it or use an LED pile and you're all tapped out, unless you're holding Force of Will, you're just dead. This is one of the best reasons to play Doomsday. You get a lot of wins that are no work, no one had a chance, people tapped out, bam, you win. Not to mention the fact that there are ways to run Lion's Eye Diamond and get around hate. For example, one of the reasons that this card is much often played in any kind of ritual-based combo deck that uses LED over something like Force of Will in general is because you can proactively remove counterspells and hate cards from the other player's hand and still efficiently use our Lion's Eye Diamond. Whereas if we cracked it in response to something on the stack and had a Force of Will in our hand, too bad, it's in the bin already, and you can't stop the incoming counterspell. Pretty simple. Cards like SDT. This is kind of like a Ponder card, right? The reason this is better than a card like Ideas Unbound is because it's better in the early phase of the game. Assuming you're playing a 3-color Doomsday deck, you're going to get at least 9 fetch lands, plus additional shuffle effects from other cards, whether it be a Ponder, a Tutor, or whatever. And this is going to allow us to not only craft our hand to find Doomsday, to find our protection spells that we need. It'll also find us additional mana sources, allow us to run a lower land count, and still make all of our land drops. This is incredibly important. The way a combo deck works is you grab a pile of cards, you're missing something, whether it be mana, protection, or your actual win condition, and you're going to actively try to fill in the gaps as quickly as possible. So we want to run a very high density of these quality cantrips. So things like Ponder, things like Brainstorm, Preordain, Sensei's Divine Top. These are a massive priority. We want to run as many as possible. Probe. I should have just typed in probe because I always spelled Gitaxian wrong. Yeah, there. That's how it's spelled. Is also an incredibly good card. Being able to see someone's hand in Doomsday is incredibly important. Make no mistake, one of the biggest, I won't say problems with Doomsday, I'll say drawbacks to using Doomsday combo is it is very all-in. A smarter player won't even counter your Doomsday. They will try to fuck your combo up post-Doomsday and put you in a position where if you don't win, you lose. So not only is this important early in the game when you're trying to craft your hand, because you get to see the other player's hand and see whether or not they're holding that counter spell, it's great when you're going off. You can make interesting piles where you go, okay, I'm going to use probe in my pile, and if I see a counter spell when I use the probe, then I'm going to do X, whereas if I don't, I'm going to do Y and win the game. And those piles are a little more advanced, but you'll get the hang of it the more you play the deck. Free cantrips are incredibly good, and we're going to be piling them, but in the hand, a Gitaxian Probe is really not worth that much more than a Ponder unless we have something extra to go with it, have Gush online. There are ways to win it for when you get a free cantrip or something like this, but they typically require something special, like maybe having a Lotus Petal that you can sack twice to a Yawgmoth's Will, etc., etc. Why do people use this card when they use Doomsday? It's actually pretty simple. Doomsday already gets rid of your whole deck for the card. You don't have to do any kind of loop combo or pay any additional mana cost. And as you're moving through your Doomsday pile, it allows you to pretty much grab the kinds of cards that let you move through a pile. You pretty much can use nothing but mana and cantrips and win, which is exactly the kind of cards you want to be putting in your Doomsday pile to move through the pile. It's really as simple as that. You can't really do the Tendrils thing like you would in one-on-one, where you're going, okay, I'm going to cast 3 cards from my hand, then Doomsday, then move through my pile, then Burning Wish, bam, Tendrils kill someone now. It's just simply not going to be efficient. Sure, you can do some kind of janky Doomsday thing to pretty much set up any kind of infinite loop combo, but that requires a much higher mana cost, and you're still going all in. And you've really lost the most powerful part about the card, which is it allows you to win at a much lower mana cost than many of the other combos in the format. And it does so in a guaranteed way. You can see your line to victory when you cast the card right away. You can say, hey, if this player has this in his hand, I can do this. Unlike casting Ad Nauseam, which is another 5-mana win card, which you could easily play in a Doomsday Shell, by the way, because your curve is going to be so low. It just lets you see exactly how you're going to win, so there's no chance work with it, other than what's in other players' hands. This is why when I played a dedicated Doomsday deck, despite the fact that this card may seem horrible to most combo players and that it doesn't cantrip and seems like a do-nothing card, Perfect Information is absolutely invaluable. So, Duress, good card. Thoughtseize, good card. In fact, I would even play Inquisition of Kozliak because there are so many cheap counter spells, and those are exactly the things that are problematic for your deck. Yes, the card can't hit Force of Will, but that's not nearly as important in Commander when there's only one Force of Will in a 100-card deck versus 4 and 60. So, we want to be playing as many of these type cards as we can to make sure that when we do attempt to go off, we don't bite the bullet. It also lets us know, hey, if I play this turn 1, I can go, hey, now I know I can use this LED pile because no one's got anything to stop me. Incredibly, incredibly important. I'm going to go through a couple other cantrips that I think are important that people sometimes skip over that they shouldn't. The first is Gush. Now, think about how a Doomsday pile works, right? You have to move through enough cards, assuming you're using Lab Manager Kill, to not only draw into your pile, but then draw out of your pile for your win, okay? So, assuming we have a cantrip that opens into our pile and there's 5 cards in the pile, Bam, we've drawn 1 card, right? So there's 4 cards left in the pile. We still need 5 total draws to get through our pile. Gush lets us draw 2 cards for free. About the only way to make... There's no card that makes mana and draws you cards that you can simply pile to just move through your pile and win and rent mana as you're winning. They don't exist. If Fastball was legal in this format, or if you're playing Exploration or something like that, it can actually be very good with Gush because you can actually do that. It's about the only card I know that can both rent mana and draw cards. In fact, if you've played Vintage, with Fast Bond out, Gush becomes stronger than Black Lotus or Ancestral Recall, netting you 2 mana and drawing you 2 cards. In fact, it's absolutely insane. Because of this, it's very important you have a high island count in your deck to be able to use this cantrip efficiently. Yet again, here comes your synergy with Dark Ritual. Being able to use 1 land to get all your mana and then still having full island count because the only black source you had out was Underground Sea is incredibly important. Gush will be used in many piles. This is also a juicy target if you're playing against a Doomsday player to hit with your counterspell. Gush is also a card that, if you're playing combo in general, though it may not seem very good in the first few turns in that you cannot craft with it, when you're playing Doomsday, you kind of want to hold your Doomsday-specific cantrip anyway. And since you need a cantrip to open your pile, having 1 Doomsday-specific cantrip, be it Ideas Unbound, Gush, or Predict, or whatever, isn't that bad, because we'll be using our other crafting cantrips to find what we need. It's also worth noting that when you get a piece to the puzzle, like Labman or an extra cantrip in your hand, you can do things to reduce the cost of your pile, even though they don't produce mana. This card is about the only other card that's going to let you do multiple things for free. Essentially get you cards and mana for free. It's kind of interesting that it costs 3 mana initially. One of the easiest ways to cast this card is to use Gush, to draw Lion's Eye Diamond, plus a cantrip. In most cases, I find this to be Probe. And now what we get to do here is we get to use a free cantrip to cast our Yogg-Will for free, get our 3 mana back, which will now pay for our Lab Man, and now we get an additional free cantrip on top. We've got this free draw back. In addition, if we had something like a Lotus Petal or something sackable, we've just gained an additional mana by using our Yawgmoth's Will pile. Another thing I like about Yawgmoth's Will piles is that if you're not using LED, or if you bin something like a Pact of Negation, you're not going to be open to Swords to Plowshare on your Lab, and you're pretty much only going to be vulnerable to counter magic. Which, cutting off, I'll say, what is only half of the things you have to worry about may not seem like something that's huge, but the counter spells are going to be used quite liberally on you earlier in the game, and considering most of your deck blanks creature removal, there's a much higher chance that there is unused creature removal in someone's hand, especially if someone's caught on to the fact that you're trying to kill them with a quick combo. But Yawgmoth's Will is incredibly powerful because it will let you do things for free. As simple as I can put it, the most efficient piles you will ever build with this deck will have these 2 cards in it. And the fastest ones you'll ever possibly have will have cards like this in your opening hand. So there's no reason not to be using them. As for what colors to use after black and blue, you have a couple different options. The thing I like about green, mainly, is that you get to play either Mana Dorks at 1, which just makes your deck a little bit faster in general. You can use ramp spells at 2 instead of signets and stuff like this, which isn't necessarily strictly better in most scenarios, but it gets your Gush online faster, and it gets you to Mana Barrier at the same time, which is fairly good. I've seen a lot of people using Edge of Autumn. I don't think that card is necessarily horrible, but something like that is also good as well, because you can use it to cantrip in your pile, and you can also use it earlier in the game to ramp mana, which is okay. I won't say it's the most amazing card ever, but seeing it in people's list before cards like Ponder makes me want to cry. Ponder lets you make land drops. Ponder lets you craft your hand. Ponder is good every damn turn, all day. You can use it to open your pile. You can use it to start your turn. These are more important types of cards. Predict. Predict is a very interesting card used by a lot of Doomsday players, and it typically comes with this. Unearth. I'll just say un-E because I can't spell worth a shit. There it is, unearth. The reason you play Predict with Unearth is fairly simple. You typically use your Predict to mill your Lab Man, and then you're going to draw 2. You're going to then use your Unearth to make the Laboratory Maniacs cost 2 less. which in general is incredibly good. The reason we like Unearth over any other reanimation spells, we don't really care, as we're only going to be returning Labman, and now it can function as a 2 colorless cantrip. And assuming we use cards like this, Mana Crypt. We need ways to use our colorless mana. Doomsday is very color intensive combo. So being able to use colorless mana for this predict or for this cycling is actually very good. You can also use it with top. So when you have this Mana Crypt that, let's say you decide to use Ad Nauseam or Recurring Insight or Time Spiral or things to refill your hand or fight through control, or things that just will set up an instant win on your next turn, or even that very same turn, it's still worth playing the Degenerate Mana Rocks, despite the fact that you really don't need the colorless mana much in your shell. So it's good to have uses for these, and this will pretty much make your Unearth almost function like a free cantrip if you have no other use for the colorless mana in your pile. That being said, Laboratory Maniac also has colorless in his cost. So if we use, say, Ideas Unbound instead of Predict, and we draw an additional card, there's no reason to get this bonus of Unearth -2, because now we can just stick something like Mana Crypt in the pile, and it's essentially done the exact same thing, right? Yes. In addition to that, if we really wanted to mill the Lab Man, and we have all these cards, we can use Ideas Unbound, grab something like Lion's Eye Diamond, and then use a Black Lotus to bin our Lab Man. Seems good. In general, the type of counter spells we want to be playing in this deck are ones that can be used to protect us. So things that are free, things that cost 1, Swan Song, Force of Will, the best being Pact of Negation, because it doesn't cost you an extra card. You will use most of the cards in your hand in this deck when you're attempting to go off. It is the easiest way to put a card in a pile that can stop your opponents without having to add any additional mana cost to your pile and still going off as fast as you possibly can. It is nice to play some counter spells to stop other players, obviously, because you don't always have God Hand, though I recommend making them cheap. Things like Cantrip are good, Arcane Denial is good, Mana Drain is good, obviously, to feed those big refill spells that we're going to be filling our shell out with, because there's just simply so much extra space that we want to be playing a few things like that so that we can refill our hand and come back into the game when we get suboptimal draws, or other players just get incredibly good draws. Benefits to playing white, I mean, you get effects like Silence and Abeyance. I really think white is a little bit better in one-on-one than it is multiplayer. I will say it is nice getting to use Allura for the extra life, especially since you're having your life total, and simply just being able to last longer. And because in general we're never going to be casting our general with a deck as fast as Doomsday, it's kind of nice that our general does this thing for 0 mana. Additionally, you could play Zur in this color and get a free Necro, which Necro is still very good in this shell, just because Necro is Necro, and as long as you're using it correctly in a combo deck, you're just going to smash people. I kind of like Allura better because he will always do his job, and we never have to waste a turn with this secondary Zurish strategy. And in fact, if I was using Zur as a main strategy, I would pretty much just want to build around the Zur and not the Doomsday. So I don't see a whole lot of benefit to that. The benefit to running red is that you can still use Doomsday, and you can build more of a Storm Shell and get a little more card quality just from the few awesome cards it has, like Wheel. But really, there's not a whole lot it's offering you either. Mainly, all that's important is that you're running blue and black. Whether you use green, white, or red is completely up to you, and I don't think there's going to be a big difference. It's nice in white that you get to play silence effects. I definitely like silence in multiplayer more than I do Orem's Chant. So there's something to be said for that, I guess. Things that I don't really like that I see in people's Doomsday decks are weird alternate win cons that cost way too much mana. People playing protection counter magic that costs 3 and 4 and tons. And it's just not very good. And mainly I made this because I was looking at Cryogen's deck after looking at the other guy's bug deck. And you can't not be playing cards simple as Ponder when you're playing janky random crap like Propaganda that does nothing for your combo and just wastes a turn. Like when you're playing combo, you're playing combo. Putting a card like that in there is just a complete and total waste in my opinion. You could put the Telepathy in that slot. Now your does nothing card actually does something useful for you, and it costs 2 less. I could probably talk about Doomsday for days, but I don't want this upload to take 5 years, and I think I have to do something in about 20 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it off here. I am going to make a few more videos and talk a little more in depth about Doomsday. I think next time I'm going to have a whole list pulled up. But in general, this is how we make Doomsday work. It's just mana, draw, and Doomsday, and that's all you need. Protection, it's just combo basics. I think one of the things I want to highlight here is EDH is really not different than Legacy or Vintage. It's really not. It's just singleton and you get more cards. Every card that was good in Magic and Vintage is still good in EDH. The 40 life thing does change some things, but all that really does is take cards that were already degenerate and make them even more degenerate. For the most part, if you go to look at a Legacy Doomsday build, most of the cards in that shell are probably good for you. In fact, Rain of Filth is good in this deck. Getting to play Dark Ritual number 2 is good. Don't believe me? Go play Doomsday and Legacy. Gush, there's a reason it's banned. Part of the reason is this card. Play it. That's going to wrap it up for now. I'll talk a little bit more about it later.